Hi everyone, this is Alice from the TUC and welcome to today's webinar. It is on menopause in the workplace and we are joined by two reps and the Health and Wellbeing Manager from Bristol City Council. Before I pass over to them, I will just run through kind of how the webinar will work and how you can ask questions during the webinar. So we aim to finish by about 3 o'clock today, maybe a bit before. And there are 3 ways to participate during the webinar. The first is we'll have a Q&A section at the end. So if you do have any questions, please post them in the questions section. You'll see a little button saying ask a question at the bottom of your screen. We also have some polls we're running today, which you can vote on. Again, next to the ask a question button, you'll see something that says polls. We have 3 polls running today, so if you vote in them, that'd be really appreciated. Finally, there is also a chat section. At the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a thing that says say something nice. Please post in here during the webinar, but if you do have any questions for the presenters, make sure they go in the Ask a Question section. During the webinar, the presenters would also like to ask you some questions during the webinar to get your ideas and find out what's happening in your workplace. So when they do ask these questions, if you could post your responses in the chat section, so where it says say something nice. I think that's everything, so I will hand over to the presenters.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate Lindsell. I'm the Health and Wellbeing Manager at Bristol City Council. I'm going to have a little cough. We're nervous. We're novices to webinars. It's our first time. But what's been amazing so far is we've been sat here for about 20 minutes preparing, and we've got a screen to our right that you can't see, but we're seeing all of your comments. And so far, there have been some really lovely things to read about. Some people are sharing their stories already. Keep that coming, because actually, you know what, this webinar for us is all about sharing our story with you. And also enabling you to share your stories with us. So our session today really is about describing our stories, how we met each other, our own personal stories about menopause. And then we're going to offer an opportunity, as Alice said, to ask some questions, and we really would welcome some interaction with you. I can see how many of you are participating today, so that we should have a lot of questions, and we'll do our very best to answer as many as we can. And as Alice said, we'll have some time at the end where we'd love to sort of ask you some questions and run some polls as well. So I've got the honour of talking to you today. We all feel very privileged to talk about menopause. It's something that's very, very dear to each of us. But I'm going to start with a bit of context about why at Bristol City Council we've got just over 6,000 employees in the centre of Bristol and spread right across the city of Bristol. We offer a huge range of support services to people of Bristol, and within that there's a number of business activities. Some of these activities are desk-based and others are involving much more of a mobile workforce. 60% of our employees are female, and of these, our data tells us that 69% of those are 40 or above. So we, with our work, have some scope to have really positive impact on lots of people and sort of start to talk about this to lots and lots of people. We are very lucky to have a very engaged leadership team. We're also very lucky that they have put health and wellbeing at the centre of our business objectives. In our organisational improvement plan, health and wellbeing is one of the major objectives for us as an organisation. And we've also got politicians in the Bristol region who are very, very keen on health and wellbeing, and have put together various health improvement plans for the city, and we will be feeding into those at some point, I'm sure. So that's the context that we have. We hope to be able to share some of what we have done, what we plan to do, and then hopefully you can tell us what you've been doing too. So I'm going to introduce you now to some of our very active and highly regarded trade union reps. Our trade unions in Bristol work so hard to champion across various different health and wellbeing agendas. But Rebecca and Beki are the champions of menopause, and they're going to share their stories with you, how you got involved. So I'm going to start with Rebecca and hand over to you.
Okay, so I'm a full-time caseworker for Bristol City Council, and I've been a steward for Unison for the past 15 years. And over that time, I've noticed a correlation between cases that I've worked on with older women with sickness absence, performance, grievances, and so forth. And it got me thinking, as a woman starting the perimenopause, was there a link? So I went to the doctor to discuss my symptoms, and he offered HRT, but I wanted to explore other routes. So I contacted our HR department and asked if we had a policy in place, and they said there wasn't. I contacted Unison, and they had a really good support guide, but nothing current. So I started to discuss with the women that I work with, and over the years, a few cases stood out to me. One of my colleagues suffered for years with gastric problems. She was going to the doctor, and she was having lots of tests, and at the end, it turned out to be menopause. And another one of my colleagues was pushed to the limits with anxiety and lots of issues in connection with heat in ventilation. And I asked what they would like, and the overriding was support and guidance from management and a group to share was the overriding message. I've also got 3 sisters who are going through the menopause, so a lot of my girlfriends, so we've got a lot to share. So I decided to contact Bristol Mayor Marvin Rees, who's the head of Bristol City Council. He was very supportive, and he agreed this was long overdue. I said we needed to get a plan in place to guide and support from the top down, and a support group so that it could be held regularly in different locations where people could come out and find more information about what was available. For too long, women have suffered in silence, and either not from being aware of what's happening or not being able to ask. So personally, I've suffered extreme panic attacks during the night as part of my perimenopause. They wake me with the urge that I'm about to die. Now I know that it's a symptom of the menopause. I can make peace with myself, go back to sleep. But some days I wake up with a terrifying sense of anxiety, not being able to juggle my workload. But by understanding that it's a peak in my hormones, I'm able to make peace with that and move on. Through exercise and healthy eating, I've also started to take a supplement which has got soy in, and that's enabled me to stabilise myself and make me feel more in control, which is great. The best medicine of all is talking. And I work with a really amazing group of people, and there's no taboos. From my manager, who's Mel, who's been really supportive with everything we've been trying to achieve with the menopause group, all the way down to the rest of the gang, and it's really great that the best support is talking. I've worked with Beki for many years on a professional level, and also as a union steward, and I was walking through City Hall last year, and I was telling her what I wanted to do, and
we were actually talking about how unwell we were feeling at the time. And
I said about what I wanted to do, and she said, I want to join the campaign. And so we've been doing that. And I've got to say, you've been an amazing help for me, because you're going through the menopause yourself, and lots of things, the foggy eyes, the aching feet, I never knew. So again, to have somebody that you can talk to and bounce off you've been an amazing support, as of you, Kate. I met Dr. Vanessa Batt, who is the author of The Effects of Menopause Transition on Women in the UK, one of the authors of the guidance, and get a trade union workshop. And I was telling her what I wanted to set up, and she said, well, I'm happy to join and help you through trying to set the process up. And then Kate was employed November as the Health and Wellbeing Manager for Bristol City Council. And when we met, it was like a light bulb moment, because we all wanted the same thing. So it was the team was built. We had our little team together, and we've met regularly ever since, trying to get a plan together. And it's work in progress. You know, we know where we want to go, but it's very early days, and this webinar is our launch, so that's cool. And I feel really proud to be part of this movement to demystify and get some real support out there for the women of Bristol City Council, and hopefully be a beacon for others to follow.
Look, we've already got a comment from Helen. Thank you, Helen. She's identifying with what you're saying, and that's really nice already. Thank you so much, Helen, for putting that on. It's not, we're obviously, you know, we're new to this. This is very new. We're not professional webinar people, so anything you can do to help us feel more at home, that would be great. I was going to ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay. How did you approach your first conversation with your line manager?
Well, I've mentioned Andrew previously in what I was saying is he's been very, very supportive. He's very open with mental health, women's health issues. And I went to see him after I had my brainwave, what I wanted to create. And I said to him, you know, would you support me with this? And he's been really good all the way through. He sends me little cuttings and things that he's found on the internet. And, you know, whatever I've needed, he's gone up to management and projected down what we're trying to create here. So I just had that conversation. I'm lucky I've got a very supportive manager to have that conversation.
And so you think, you know, your manager is someone that would talk about health in general, so it felt you're more able to talk about menopause. I felt the door was
open to be able to have that conversation. However, reading some of the comments, that's not always the case. So we need to acknowledge that.
And then within your casework, you pick up lots of casework in your TU steward role. If you've come across situations, I know, and we've talked before, where you felt someone could be experiencing menopausal symptoms, I guess for me it's really interesting how you would broach the subject with somebody.
So it's very tricky, because some people do not even understand that they're going through the menopause or have not made that connection. I think having come through this process with you and how open we now feel about the menopause, I think I'd ask more about women's health issues. Is there any women's health issues that you may feel are going on at the moment, just to start that segue into having the conversation, and to mention my own situation to make them feel more comfortable to have that discussion.
And it's really great that as our TU reps now in Bristol are starting to become more familiar with this conversation. It's something that you're
I've had quite a few people coming up to me saying, oh, we've heard about what you're trying to do. So the word's getting out there, and I think it's making it easier to have that conversation.
Okay, Beki, I'm going to turn to you now. So, you know, you've been a real advocate and champion of this, and you've also had a really positive experience with your manager.
Yes, I have. I suppose for me, I'm talking from I'm a rep in Bristol City Council, and my job is in adult care, and I do quite a lot of office-based work, but I also work outside the office and visit people's houses. And I suppose my issues started about quite a long time ago, about 8 years ago. And I had a young child, and I was working, single parent, quite tired. Anyone would be generally quite tired. And I just didn't feel very well, and I felt a bit peculiar, and I couldn't exactly understand or put a name to it, and I couldn't even express what it was really. It was very subtle, and I didn't even think at those stages about it could be the menopause. I suppose I was about 40, early 40s, 44. So I think what I've learned from this whole process is that you sometimes make a lot of excuses to begin with and blame other things. And I had historic thyroid problems from way before. I blamed a lot of it on thyroid. I blamed it on, the fact that I had old parents, perhaps. I was just exhausted. So we tend to put a lot of blame on everything else that's happening around us and in our lives. And sometimes this gets overlooked. And we could sort of look, perhaps, or I could have looked a little bit more in detail about it. But when I did start having sort of symptoms, these subtle symptoms.
And there's no test for the perimenopause, is there?
Well, I did approach my B, and there was suggestions at the time that it could possibly be the start of perimenopause, or it probably is. Of course, you haven't got a certificate. No one's going to say, well, you're definitely going through the menopause now, so there's something that you can approach your manager with. It's all very ambiguous, really. It's a lot of suggestion and so forth. And I think that sort of, obviously, when it comes to going to your manager, you can only suggest things. There's nothing that you can say, I've got a broken leg, I've got a broken, and so all these little symptoms started getting more and more, and talking about dry eyes and itchy skin and repeated UTIs and repeated headaches and things like that, which wouldn't necessarily be menopause. So I didn't have the hot flushes and the classic signs of it, but there was lots of little things that, you put them all together, it was starting to affect my daily work, really. And I think the biggest thing was sleep deprivation. And for some reason, I just wasn't able to get enough sleep to sustain a normal day, plus a normal day at doing everything else that was called upon me to do. And that I found difficult. And I think with that extra pressure, it started to come out as a very anxious problem, which I tended to think it was more of a mental health, anxiety issue. I went down that pathway, which I did for quite a few years, really. So, because it's been quite a long process. And I didn't really know much about the perimenopause, in all fairness. I knew about menopause, but I didn't know much about the perimenopause and how rotten it makes you feel.
Debilitating.
It can. So what I wanted to talk about, especially in this, was how it affected my work. One, I was knackered. By about midday, I couldn't string a sentence together. I was getting words jumbled and so forth, and I got a real dip in the afternoons, which I'd still get, to be honest. So my sleeping was very bad. Anxiety was very bad. But also the other things with the perimenopause and the menopause is that if you have any treatment, it doesn't happen straight away. So if you get given some medication, it can take months and adjustments for months before you actually start perhaps to feel better, if at all. So it is a long sort of process. But the thing that went from, in my mind, from perimenopause to menopause was, and I'm going to have to say the P word, which was the period from hell. Okay. And it's not a subject that you possibly would approach with your manager, but I think it needs to be said in this context, because I had a period that lasted for 14 months. I needed surgery in the end, but that really affected my job, because I lost a lot of confidence being able to go out, doing longer visits, planning my itinerary so I would know that if I was going to somebody's house, I'd have to go to the toilet somewhere else before I could then go to somebody's house, because it was so heavy, and it was so fear of something happening. It was so embarrassing that it really changed my behaviour at work. So that was the other side of having all that, under the menopause. Really, so
really tough.
I hope you don't mind me sharing.
It needs to be said. It needs to be said.
But sorry, I was just going to say about how. So I knew I was needing to have to address it, because I couldn't really manage my day-to-day, sort of work life, really. So I then obviously had to pluck up courage and see my manager at the time. So. Do you want to ask me any questions?
Well, I do, because somebody said up there, women can be equally as challenging to
very much
talk to about menopause as males. So let's pick that up, because you had a female manager.
I've got a female manager that's for the last 3 years, but obviously this whole process has been going on for quite a long time, and I've had male and female managers, and I think that's part of perhaps my personality, that I've had to I've taken on board that I need to tell them, rather than them coming to me saying, I'm sorry, your work performance or something needs to be addressed. It was, right, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to say I'm struggling at the moment and I need some kind of help or adjustments made or something to help me to do, to get through the.
And that was flexible working?
Yes, yeah, it was a bit of occupational health. It was flexible working arrangements, which has been a great help. And the success has been that through that sort of flexibility, I haven't needed to take any sickness for the last 3 years.
Yeah. So if you didn't catch that, any managers that are listening,
I know.
flexible working, no sickness absence for 3 years, because your manager was able to work with you to come up with a plan.
And it's the first thing when I go into supervision. The first thing on the agenda is how are you feeling, and it brings up my well-being before we start talking about casework and things that perhaps aren't going too well in the job. The first thing is always about my well-being and what's planned or what hasn't worked. So the focus is on that, which has been, I think, a bit of a revelation really in the approach at work.
Perfect.
And like you, Rebecca, I was lucky. And I still think that the luck word.
Reading some of these, I think we've been very lucky.
Lucky. It shouldn't have to be like that. And I'm sure there's others, even in the same organisation, that perhaps I wouldn't have felt so comfortable. Which you're obviously going to talk about the plans of the future. But I have been lucky that I've been able to be in a position where I can approach someone without feeling a failure or without feeling embarrassed, and have these conversations, because it's part of life. It's
One of the same, you've touched on it, but one of the real challenges that we are still thinking about, we talked about before, is how we support people that are out and about all day long. Because we've shared stories about the benefits of having Sainsbury's en route or a Tesco.
The lack of toilets in Bristol.
Yeah, I'm sure we've got people working in other areas, rural communities that would have a similar problem. How did you get you personally?
It caused so much anxiety. It caused so much anxiety because we often have to go down to Somerset and Wales and way out of town really. And I used to have to take like a suitcase really with me, like I was going away to Vienna for the weekend, just in case of all the things that
eventualities
that could go wrong. The car could break down, which it did actually. The car could break down, and having a flood and being able to, all these things are things that you have to go through if you've got that kind of issue. And it changes your your working day really. It's just trying to be really well planned and looking at the worst case scenario, and even seeing en route if you can use a Sainsbury's toilet or a Tesco's if it's nearby.
It's really interesting reading some of the things come up. One of the people that I've mentioned felt like they had early onset of dementia, and that's you get that. I've been through that.
I actually went to the doctors once saying that I thought I had dementia. And it does the brain fog.
Brain fog's come up.
The brain fog is quite.
So you're spending a lot of time managing your symptoms and trying to provide workarounds. How am I going to get from this appointment to that appointment via a toilet, via this, doing that? So actually, whereas many of us are going through work just going from one appointment to the next or one meeting to the next, what we're starting to hear now is that for some women experiencing these sorts of symptoms, they've got to factor in another 10 steps in addition to their working day. Yeah, that's interesting.
Very difficult.
It is difficult, yeah.
Okay, right, now the next thing, so we've seen lots of things people are talking down the side about. Well, we had a telling off there, so I'm sorry, we had a telling off for apologising for saying period.
We're not sorry.
We're not sorry. We're not sorry at all.
That's what we would.
No, they're saying don't apologise.
Don't apologise, I was
for
going to
saying
say.
and quite right too. So it's just, we're still, all of us, society is still getting used to being able to
demystify, don't we? We need to de-taboo it.
That's right. And Carla put a comment on there about, do you feel there's still a stigma around the menopause?
It's
not so much here, but I think elsewhere, possibly.
I think I think in particular, perhaps in particular organisations, I would imagine there would be more of a stigma.
In particular sectors, maybe.
Yes. Yeah. It's not seen as a positive word, is that? The menopause, and I think it's something that happens to some degree to every woman for a certain amount of time, and obviously some effects can be less than others, but it does happen, and it's part of the natural life. So it shouldn't really be an issue.
No.
Okay, well, let's move on to the third part then, and this was about sort of giving people a bit of information about what we're planning to do. So first thing to say is that the Department of Health document that's available online, The Effects of Menopause Transition on Women, is very, very helpful. We also highly recommend the TUC toolkit. It's really, really helpful. It can act as a model policy as well for people that are thinking about, where do I start with this? It's quite useful. There's a website that we also highly recommend, which is called Henpicked, and also nice guidance as well. And we sort of looked at the literature, didn't we? I remember the first time we met and you brought me a file and went, there's the literature. I want you to do something with that, please, which was fine. And we went all the way through that. So ultimately, we've got a work plan in place that we're working on. And the first one really is about raising awareness, isn't it? It's about working with your TU colleagues and all of our employees across Bristol City Council to provide more information, open information on our intranet site about what are the symptoms, what might you be experiencing, the support available, what managers can do to help. And again, if you look in that TUC toolkit, there's really some excellent templates for risk assessments that can be used to sort of facilitate that conversation. Somebody on the screen had mentioned the policy of the University of Leicester. Again, we looked at that. It's an excellent policy. And in there, they've got some kind of suggested reasonable adjustments according to the type of thing that might be going on. I know reasonable adjustments can be quite tricky. Nobody quite knows, what to do. What I would say is it needs to be person-centered. One size certainly does not fit all, and not everybody gets symptoms. Some people's symptoms are more severe than others. So it's very much a case of working out a specific plan that works for an individual. So we have that coming up on our intranet. The second thing we're doing is we're building an e-learning course, which will be open to everyone at Bristol City Council, which will sort of go through some activities. We're just having that built at the moment. Alex, who's one of the members of our team, is building that. We are looking at the templates in use for the way that we do one-to-ones and PDRs. And that's not so much particular to menopause, but it will certainly talk more about health and well-being and give an extra sort of avenues for people to feel comfortable talking about health and well-being, so that it doesn't, present so many barriers. It's just we start to have much more familiar language around health and well-being. Our second key area after raising awareness is about support. We're looking at the moment, our colleagues in our HR department are working really hard to redraft our absence policy to make sure that it's about people first, It's about being really helpful and clear when someone really is unwell, how we can get the best support in place for people. We've created, haven't we, a menopause email address for our colleagues across the council. So I suppose it might end up being a little bit like this chat room with people coming in and asking us various questions. Just because we felt that, whilst we don't know the answers and we're certainly not medically trained, we might at this point in time have information about where to signpost people and encourage people to get medical support and advice. So we have got that it's Menopause at Bristol, if anyone can get in touch with us. Next week, we're about to launch our support groups. So we've got, this is going to be really exciting, isn't it? 5 across the city.
Yeah.
So we're going to be launching that next week. All of our employees are invited to come and take part. And we're basically having a little cafe. What we're going to talk about is open, people telling us about their experiences, what worked for them.
Sharing space.
Yeah. And we're going to sort of keep a log of all of the good ideas that come up in there. And then come up with some practical solutions.
Yeah.
One solution we're working on at the moment we've heard it elsewhere, haven't we? The red box scheme, where we're hopefully Bristol at the same time as us doing a project on menopause. Our councillors are doing a project on period poverty. Yeah. So we're hoping to get those two things lined up and offer free sanitary products and other emergency items for women. Anyone in our loos in Bristol City Council is a sort of first practical thing we can think about. We also thought about maps, toilet maps across the city, toilet maps.
Amazing,
which is very much needed. Very much needed.
Yeah, exactly. Let's have a look. What else are we up to? We are Dr. Beck is a Bristol University expert on menopause. She's helping us devise a survey, isn't she?
Yeah. So that will be launched shortly.
Yeah. So we're going to ask people their experiences. What's in the? Do you remember? We give away some of the questions that people might be able to?
It was positive experiences people have had, negative experience people have had. Any things that they could share with us that we can use, for future.
Yeah. And in October, we're celebrating Menopause Awareness Day. And that I feel that was quite popular across the country last year, actually. There were some adverts on Channel 4 I noticed last year. So Menopause Awareness Day is in October, and our mayor has agreed
somebody's just put toilet maps. Brilliant idea.
Excellent, great. So we're going to have this thing called a hot flush event, where we will sort of bring all of our findings from our support groups and our cafes and everything we've done to date, and really have a big exercise to work through what we might want to do next, what's really going to be the most helpful thing for our women. And one of the things that's just happened is we've just put a women's health code into our reasons for absence code. So now when a woman has an absence and it's relating to some element of women's health, we can actually ask them to record that. I think we asked a question, actually, didn't we, about how many people have been off sick and called for the menopause and called it something else. Yeah. How's that poll looking, Alice? Have we got any answers to that one? Let's have a look. So how many people have taken time off because of the menopause?
The 18th of October is Menopause Day.
Okay. If you've had time off because of your menopause, did you use a different reason? So 30% are saying yes, and 70% are saying no. And of course, that might be some people saying no, they've not had absence as well. But there's a good 9 people there saying that they have, in fact, used a different excuse. So that's really interesting. Okay, but our plans will evolve as we start to listen and understand more about.
It's work in progress, right?
Very much so. Exactly. Very much so. And I think really in the last 6 months alone, there's been real leap, hasn't there, with awareness at the council, people's enthusiasm as well, about the fact that we're looking into it and tackling it. Somebody actually, at long last, is tackling it and also collating numbers and information, and that will just feed into sickness and absence. And
it's a really challenging, because without data it's very difficult to be able to talk about the prevalence. And so my mind's always on, right, what practical things can we do, but also at the same time, what's the scale of the problem? So I would encourage people to think about how they might be able to measure the uptake of some of the things that they are experiencing now, like how many women have they got, how many of those women are, what's the average absence rate, days off sick for women in the plus 40 category? Is it any different to anybody else? And start to explore the data and see if that you can think about other ways you can measure. One of that I spent a long time working in the NHS, and one of the most popular and easy ways to collate data was on the back of the toilet doors. So a pen and a piece of paper for a tally chart on the back of the toilet door gave a quick sample of the question of the day around health and well-being. That could be one way. It could be people use various technologies these days. We could have some votes going on and stuff like that. So we're going to ask you a couple of questions now. I think Alice has got them written up in the question side of things. We'll give you a minute or two. Have we got any answers yet, Alice?
No, not yet. I'm just putting them up on the screen.
It's just interesting seeing that question there. It says, I've been taking time off with migraines. It took her a long time to realise it was perimenopause and other people's, making the connection that there may be issues.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got some poll results here. So thanks everyone for having a little vote. So we can see quite a few of our participants are voting. So is there a current working policy on the menopause in your workplace? 84.7% is a no at the moment. So not many of us are have a policy. I guess that's the question of whether your organisation is policy-led or whether it would start off with more awareness raising. Would a policy actually help you as a starting point is the question I would ask.
Yeah.
What would you would need, perhaps start with more of an awareness approach. What else have we asked, Alice, in our questions?
The questions that are up on the screen now, and if people would want to write their answers in the chat section. The first one is, can other people on the webinar give one action they are taking or intending to take to improve menopause awareness and support in their workplace?
Okay.
So we've had, first one, share this webinar.
Yeah. Fame at last, lady.
The second question is, for those who have been working on this for some time, what one thing has made the biggest difference? And the third question is, what more can employers do to help?
Okay. Jenna's saying on question one is, can anyone give us an action they're taking or intending to take for menopause awareness? Jenna, thank you, Jenna. She's saying that she's organised menopause awareness training sessions delivered through Unite, but not union branded. So that's great. So there's some awareness training going on. If anybody else wants to give any examples of actions they are taking in their workplace, that would be incredibly helpful to everyone on the call, I would imagine. What do you think is going to be our most impactful action?
For me personally, which is what I wanted, is a support group. I want the support group because I think talking through, is for me is the biggest help. So me personally, that's what I'm really looking forward to getting up and running. Yeah. Other people may not, because talking is very personal, isn't it?
Yeah.
But for me, what about you, Bex?
It's the same. I found, especially with the perimenopause, when you don't really know what's happening that time, the most frightening.
Yeah, and it is frightening, scary.
I think when you get those classic menopause signs, sometimes it can be slightly easier as the early stages. And I think for me, that was when I really wanted the support network, and it can be quite lonely for some.
Very lonely.
And you don't know perhaps who to, you might not want to at that stage approach a manager. You might be in perhaps a male dominated working environment. So I think the support like we have with our, or what we're planning to have, where you can email and so forth, so you don't feel so alone. So when you do get these
We've got a buddy.
symptoms and
We've
these
got a
fears-
buddy system as well. So me and Beki, we're the buddies. If I've got any issues, I can text her, or we share information. We were sharing
we
stuff.
share a lot of information now, things
bits and bobs that we see. So I think that I'd like to promote that as well as part of our support group, that people find someone that they can trust and support to offload to.
I think it would be nicer. I would like to see more equitable practice in the workplace. So I was lucky. You may not have been so lucky. So it's management training really on how they approach and how they support, and it to be consistent. So you get the same support, whichever environment and whichever team that you are in. So it's more, although it's person-centered, it's a standardized policy. So nobody misses out dependent on where you're working.
And some of the education element is crucial here. As we creep in our age, coming behind us are a generation that need to understand some of these issues, and having encouraging our millennials and our younger employees to get involved in some of these groups and to understand what's coming. I mean, I remember when talking to my mum and my nan years ago about this thing called the change, and it was all a bit hush hush and don't talk about that and so on and so forth. And I think, as we as a nation work longer, and now retirement age is creeping up, we have to accept the aging process in the workplace, and we have to get everybody to understand all the different variances that might bring, and actually work together to get the creative,
get the best out of people.
Yeah, it's getting the best out of people, isn't it?
Because you can. If you have the right support, then you can. And you don't have to take time off.
As you've proven.
I've proven it, yes. But also there's been so many people that have left work because it's the easier option to leave their employment than to struggle through the.
And I think over the years, people that I've lost through union work that have probably had menopause behind the scenes, is we need to make a change. We need to make a change.
Okay, so could you scroll up the list for me a little bit, Alice, so we can see what people have answered to some of these questions? I think we have a look for any answers to question 2, if that's okay. So for those that have been working on this for some time, what's the one thing that has made the biggest difference? Okay, Alice is going to pass me over the technology now, which is going to be fun. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
You'll see that.
Okay. Oh, can I just ask you to... There we go. Okay, so let's have a look at what you've told us. That we're looking for question 2s. Sharon, for question 1, has said that they've got a training awareness for line managers and a policy. That's great. Hello to our colleagues in Forest Hospital, and they've been running 1-hour sessions with a consultant doctor there, which is fab on awareness. Menopause Cafe, that's really interesting. I've seen that pop up a few times. That's something for us to go and have a look at, isn't it? I think that's excellent.
I found a venue.
Yeah.
We looked into finding
you found it?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's quite a little bit of interest in terms of what's the Menopause Cafe. That's really good. Okay. And then the question 3, so what more can employers do to help? Jenna, thanks again. Periods of menopause should be normalised topics in the workplace. We agree with you, Jenna. Okay, so we've got an opportunity now for people to ask any other questions that they might have. Someone has put in a question. I'm currently trying to introduce a policy. I have a copy of the policy at Leicester as a reference, Leicester University as a reference. I'm finding the process slow. I've been allowed to present it at a T&C meeting, but it seems to just be sitting there. Any tips to move this along? Well, you're the queen of getting things moved along.
I think you just got to ask.
Yeah.
You just got
right at the top.
Get to the very. I emailed Marvin Rees, who is the head of Bristol City Council, and said, could we make this happen? And I think sometimes you've just got to be brave and get out there and do it, because otherwise you're not going to make the change.
There appears to be more the culture's
I
changing.
think so.
And I think I was watching, there's quite a lot of programs now, don't they, talk about the menopause and so forth.
It's very
So
well
it seems-
publicised now.
Yeah.
So, but definitely going for the top, really.
Top
I think.
down.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, as I've said, the value of data. If you have data, if it is possible, then it can be very powerful. Obviously, there are caveats to data. In some sectors, the accuracy of the data might not be there. It might not be, being recorded accurately. But if you have it, then it's very useful. What other questions have we got here? Could we campaign to get menopause recognised as a chronic condition? Hang on, someone's asked another question and it moved. Get a chronic condition similar to pregnancy. I think actually I would say have a look at that TUC policy in response to that, because they are very much likening it to pregnancy in there, and have suggested we use similar risk assessment tools that we use for pregnancy related risks, and sort of some kind of reasonable adjustments we might make for menopause management. Okay. The male menopause was mentioned at a recent seminar I attended. Yeah, you have a Google of that. I think it's called the andropause from memory.
Yeah.
If you wanted to explore, I know lots of institutions. There's a few universities on the line. I know we've focused in the university sector on Athena Swan, and but in an inclusive environment, have a look at both.
Yeah.
Have a look at the impact on both genders. Any other questions? Alice, have I missed any that are coming through that you can highlight?
So there's a question from Sarah saying, do you know if there's anyone on the business side encouraging managers or business owners to look at these policies? So if there's anyone kind of from the business sector as opposed to trade unions that are doing similar work?
I don't know the answer to that.
We can get back
go and
to
have a look. Yeah. It's certainly something that would be useful, especially if they were focused on absence data. But in order to get absence data, as I said, you have to have a code and be able to generate people's enthusiasm to want to report on that code. Because whilst it's, everyone can have different absence codes, it's a question of whether people use the correct one at that time.
Great. Yeah. And there's just one last quick question. That is, you mentioned that Bristol were developing e-learning around menopause, and someone has asked if that would be widely available so people outside the council can access it, or is that something that's just for Bristol staff?
I think at the moment it would be launched on our internal systems, so it would only be accessible. But there's no reason for us not to be able to share it with people that were on this call, or if people wanted to get in touch with us at Bristol.
Yeah,
there's no reason.
We've got the email address, so
get
in touch.
Okay.
Brilliant. And it's just worth mentioning that the TUC does have some e-learning around the menopause as well.
Right.
So in the meantime, that resource is available. We can send out the link after the webinar, not after the menopause.
I have to say, the TUC resources.
That's how I met Vanessa Beck on a TUC menopause training course. So it was really, really helpful.
The TUC documents are, if you have a look, they are extremely helpful and really high quality and really well thought through. So I can't champion those enough. But yeah, I think we've reached the end of our questions. Alice has asked me to showcase the next webinar that's available to members. Is on the 9th of May, and it's about running a learning event at work to celebrate the fact that the week of the 13th of May is Learning at Work Week. So Alice has asked me to share with you. That's the next webinar. So we're very, very grateful for everybody that's listened. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you very much.